My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment. Do not rush past these words as if they were meant for someone else. Something has been waiting for you in this exact moment, and there is a reason your eyes have arrived here now. What you are about to hear is not a prediction of doom, and it is not a command to fear. It is a fictional spiritual message, a cinematic glimpse into a story of love, regret, silence, and the word someone has been carrying alone for far too long. Pause here, breathe, because in this story, there is someone who has been thinking about you in the quietest hours of the night, someone who has replayed old conversations until the words no longer sound like words. Someone who has stared at their phone, typed your name, written a message, deleted it, written another, and then placed the phone face down because they could not find the courage to press send. And what they have been hiding is not simply a secret, it is a confession wrapped in shame, a confession buried beneath fear, a confession they convinced themselves they could carry alone. But they are discovering something painful. Some secrets do not become lighter with time. They become heavier, and tonight, in this fictional story, heaven is pulling back the curtain just enough for you to understand what has been happening behind the silence. You may have wondered why this person suddenly became distant. Why their energy changed. Why the warmth that once seemed effortless became hesitation. Why someone who once looked at you as though you were the safest place in the world suddenly began acting as though your presence frightened them. You may have blamed yourself. You may have wondered whether you said something wrong, whether you were too much, whether you were not enough, whether they found someone else. Whether the connection you felt was only something you imagined. But listen carefully, beloved child, because the first revelation in this story is this: their distance was never as simple as rejection. There was a battle happening inside them that you could not see. And the deeper they fell into that battle, the more they convinced themselves that disappearing would somehow protect you. They thought silence was mercy. They thought absence was kindness. They thought if they walked away before you discovered the truth, you would eventually forget them. But forgetting you was the one thing they could not do. That is where the story becomes deeper, because every time they tried to move forward, something brought them back to you. A song, a place, a familiar phrase, a photograph they never deleted, a memory that appeared without permission. Sometimes even a completely ordinary moment would suddenly remind them of the way you looked at them when they were not pretending to be strong. And that memory would break something open inside them. They began realizing that they had not simply walked away from a person, they had walked away from the one person they believed might have understood them, and now regret has become their quiet companion. Not the dramatic kind of regret that announces itself, the kind that arrives at 2:17 in the morning. The kind that sits beside someone in a dark room while everyone else sleeps, the kind that asks the same question over and over. Why didn't I tell them? Why didn't I trust them? Why did I let fear speak for me? Why did I assume they would leave before I even gave them the chance to choose? And there is something else you need to understand. This person has been carrying information about their health that changed the way they saw themselves. In this fictional story, they received a positive test result for a serious intimate health condition, and the result frightened them more deeply than they ever admitted, not because a diagnosis determines the worth of a human being. It does not. Not because illness makes someone unlovable. It does not. But because they became terrified of being judged, terrified of being misunderstood, terrified that the moment they told you, your eyes would change. They imagined you stepping backward. They imagined your voice becoming colder. They imagined you wondering how this happened, where it came from, and why they had waited. They imagined 1,000 endings before they ever allowed themselves to imagine one honest conversation, and that is how fear began building walls around a heart that wanted nothing more than to be seen. You see, beloved child, sometimes a person does not hide because they do not care. Sometimes they hide because they care so much that the possibility of losing you becomes unbearable. That does not make the hiding right. It does not erase the consequences. It does not excuse dishonesty, but it explains the trembling hand behind the silence. And somewhere deep inside, this person knows they owe you the truth. They know there are conversations that cannot remain postponed forever. They know love cannot survive indefinitely on assumptions. They know that if they ever come back to you, they cannot come back wearing the same mask. They must come back as the person who finally tells the truth. That realization has been haunting them, because there is a moment in every story when hiding becomes more painful than confession, and they are approaching that moment. You may not know it yet, but something inside them has begun to shift. The old excuses are no longer working. They cannot keep saying, "I'll tell them tomorrow." They cannot keep saying, "Maybe they have forgotten me." They cannot keep saying, "It is better this way." Because every time they say those things, your memory rises again, and the strange thing is, they don't remember you only in the romantic moments. They remember the little things, the way you laughed at something nobody else found funny, the expression on your face when you were pretending not to care, the kindness you showed when they thought nobody was watching, the moment you encouraged them when they were quietly falling apart. The ordinary conversations that seemed meaningless at the time but now feel priceless, those memories have become mirrors, and in those mirrors, they see the person they were before fear took over. They see someone who wanted to love honestly, someone who wanted to build something real, someone who wanted to stop running. And then comes the hardest realization: they were not only running from you, they were running from themselves. They were running from the possibility that someone might see every imperfect part of them and still choose compassion. They were running from vulnerability. They were running from accountability. They were running from the terrifying possibility that honesty might not destroy the connection after all. And that possibility is what keeps them awake. Because what if you would have understood? What if you would have listened? What if they had trusted you enough to let you make your own decision? What if their greatest mistake was not the diagnosis, not the circumstances, not the past, but the silence that came afterward? That question has become unbearable. And now, in the quietest part of their mind, another thought has begun forming: I need to tell them. Not because they expect forgiveness, not because they believe you owe them another chance, not because they think love erases responsibility, but because you deserve the truth. and they deserve the chance to stop hiding behind fear. This is where the atmosphere changes, because there is a message they have almost sent you, several times. One version began with your name, another simply said, "I need to tell you something." Another was nothing but an apology. They stared at each one, their thumb hovered over the screen, and then they stopped. Fear won again. But fear is beginning to lose its power. Something has changed. Maybe it was a conversation with someone they trust. Maybe it was a moment alone when the weight finally became too heavy. Maybe it was seeing something that reminded them of you. Or perhaps it was simply the realization that another day of silence felt more painful than the possibility of hearing an answer they feared. Whatever caused it, the door is beginning to open, and behind that door is the truth. But before that truth reaches you, there is another layer you must understand. Do not romanticize their suffering. Do not mistake their sadness for proof that you are destined to rescue them. You are not responsible for saving another person from their inner darkness. You are not required to sacrifice your boundaries because someone regrets their choices. You are not required to accept a relationship simply because someone finally becomes honest. Love is not a prison. Compassion is not surrender. Forgiveness is not permission for someone to repeat the same wound. If this fictional story feels personal to you, remember that your safety, dignity, and informed choices matter. The person in this story must eventually take responsibility for their own healing. They must seek appropriate medical care. They must communicate honestly. They must respect your boundaries. And they must understand that telling the truth does not guarantee the ending they want. They can no longer decide what you will think. They can no longer control whether you stay. They can no longer hide behind assumptions. They can only offer the truth and accept your freedom to respond. And perhaps that is the real spiritual lesson hidden inside this story. Sometimes we believe love means keeping someone from being hurt, but real love also means allowing another person to know the truth so they can make informed choices. Sometimes we think silence protects a relationship, but silence built on fear can slowly destroy the very thing we were trying to protect. And this person is beginning to understand that. They are beginning to understand that their greatest regret is not that life became complicated. Their greatest regret is that they made you live inside a mystery you never agreed to enter. They wonder whether you have been blaming yourself, whether you thought you were forgotten, whether you believe they stopped caring, and that thought hurts them more than they know how to explain, because the truth, at least within this fictional story, is that they never stopped caring. They simply became terrified of what caring might require from them: honesty, courage, accountability, and the willingness to be seen without the protection of a perfect image. Now imagine the scene. The room is quiet, the lights are low, their phone is in their hand, your name is on the screen. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then they begin typing. This time, they do not write a dramatic declaration. They do not promise forever. They do not ask you to save them. They write something much simpler: "I should have told you the truth." They stop, read it again. Their eyes fill with tears. They continue: "I was afraid. Delete, start again, I didn't know how to tell you. Delete, again, there is something about my health you deserve to know. And there it is, the first crack in the wall, the first sentence they have been afraid to write. But then their hand freezes, because they know the next words could change everything. They know this is the point of no return. They know that once they press send, the secret will no longer belong only to them, and just as their finger moves toward the screen, something happens that they never expected. They look at an old photograph of you, and for the first time, they stop imagining your reaction. They imagine your humanity. They imagine that you might be shocked. They imagine that you might have questions. They imagine that you might need time. They imagine that you might be angry. And instead of running from those possibilities, they finally understand something. Your response is yours. Your decision is yours. Your boundaries are yours. All they can control is whether they tell the truth. So they take a breath, and they begin writing the message they should have written long ago. But beloved child, this is where the story reaches the edge of the revelation. Because the secret they have been carrying is not the only thing they are preparing to confess. There is another sentence beneath it. A sentence connected to the night everything changed. A sentence that explains why they disappeared when they did. A sentence that reveals what they were thinking about you immediately after receiving the result, and when you finally hear what they wanted to say that night. You may understand why their silence became so intense. Because the truth they are preparing to reveal is not only about what happened to them, it is about what they believed would happen to you. And that is the part they have been most afraid to say. The message is still unsent. Their finger is still hovering. The room is still silent. And somewhere between fear and courage, between regret and hope, they finally whisper your name. Before pressing the button that could change